All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We've been graced with President Martin Galvin today. He agreed to come down and speak to us, so I'll give you all a brief introduction. You know me, I'm the events coordinator, John McGuire. See you all out at Gaelic football practice. Hopefully I'll see you all tomorrow. Martin Galvin is a graduate of both Fordham College and Fordham Law School. Currently serves as the National Freedom for All Ireland Chairman of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, America's oldest and largest Irish-American organization. And he's been a prominent American advocate of Irish national freedom for more than 4 decades. In 1979, he became National Publicity Director of Irish Northern Aid and led nationwide American support in the lead-up and during the hunger strike of Bobby Sands and his Patriot companions. He also became the editor of the Irish People Weekly in 1979, the voice of Irish republicanism in America, now online at Indiana University and archived at New York University. He held both positions for 15 years. He's frequently invited to give major speeches in Ireland, including Bodenstown, Easter commemorations in Derry, Tyrone, and Donegal, Ballymurphy Murders commemoration and internment day rallies in Belfast, the Liam Ryan commemoration in Tyrone, Crossberry commemoration in Cork, Brendan Hughes lecture, and the George McBrady commemoration in Derry. He testified as an expert witness in the McBride Principles and other Irish issues in Congress and state legislatures of New York, Illinois, Connecticut, and New Jersey, as well as many city councils. He became a frequent panelist for Irish candidate forums and as a panelist for the Irish American Presidential Forum in 1992. He asked then candidate Clinton the groundbreaking question about granting a visa to Gerry Adams and ending visa censorship against Irish Republicans. He has been a featured guest on ABC's Nightline, NBC Today, CNN, PBS, as well as Irish and British television networks. People magazine called Martin Galvin the foremost advocate for the Irish Republican cause in America. The British government banned him from the 6 counties in 1984, when Mr. Galvin was called to address a peaceful rally in Belfast by Gerry Adams. British forces brutally murdered one man, John Downs, and injured scores more. RTE journalists went on a 48-hour strike to protest government refusal to allow an interview with him. After Mr. Galvin defied the ban to carry a coffin alongside Martin McGuinness in 1985, In 1989, Mr. Galvin walked through Derry publicly with Martin McGuinness, was arrested by British Crown forces and flown to England, briefly imprisoned, and then shipped back on a military plane to the United States. Britain then withdrew the ban. As an attorney, Mr. Galvin fought immigration court battles for former Irish Republican prisoners now in the United States with their American wives and children, and won the ruling that AOH member and former political prisoner Brian Pearson could not be deported because the IRA was engaged in a legitimate struggle against British rule, not terrorism. This verdict helped secure a settlement of the cases against several of the Irish political deportees. He also campaigned for recently deported AOH member Malachi McAllister. Mr. Galvin was a leader of the Gerry McGough family campaign, attending Belfast court proceedings, by which the British in February 2011 jailed the Tyrone Republican and former Tyrone County AOH president for a 1981 incident in retaliation for his election campaign. In 2015, his selection as aide to the Grand Marshals Cardinal Dolan of the New York St. Patrick's Day Parade is credited with forcing the unwanted British PSNI constabulary to withdraw from the parade. From 2015 through 2018, Mr. Galvin co-hosted Radio Free Erin, a weekly Irish political program heard noon Saturdays in New York on station WBAI 99.5 FM, which was heard across the country and in Ireland through live streaming on WBAI.org. He is currently the Bronx County President, former Bronx Division 5 President, and current National FFAI Chairman. So without further ado, this is Mr. Martin Galvin.
I keep adding to that resume and stuff. I just should cut it. I don't even like listening to all of it. Anyway. Arja, listen, first of all, I want to thank everybody, the Gaelic Society, everybody here who is responsible for inviting me to speak. When I was asked to speak, what I do is, in a case like this, when it's an audience I might be a little different than the ones I usually address, I always ask, what do you want me to talk about? And I was told, talk about Irish American identity, why that's related so much to the north of Ireland, why I got so much involved, my own background and perspective, and also something I was actually responsible for in 1981, the year of the hunger strike, one of the most important years in Irish history, one of the most important names in Irish history, Bobby Sands. I was the one who sent his brother, Sean Sands. He had been done one speaking tour, was about to do another, and I brought him in. I promised people at demonstrations downtown that as a Fordham graduate, not only from the college, but from the law school, as soon as the hunger strike ended, I'd take care of you and get him down here. And I got him here. And just reading, he had 300 people at Keating Hall, according to the RAM, and he said it was a very moving address, and I'm sure it was, because I know if I spoke for 3 hours, the only moving people would do is, oh, I got a class here, and just take off. So I'm not going to do anything like that. But I think the hunger strike, just Sean Sands' appearance, might be just a good introductory point, jumping off point. You see feelings about Ukraine today. It's on the news in the morning. I can only imagine what it's like if I was Ukrainian, if I had some kind of ancestral roots back there, if I had feelings about seeing another country, overwhelming military might, taking over, oppressing it, justice, what that would mean for the future, what it would mean economically. Ireland, in a sense, not as dramatic as that is perhaps just at this moment, but that same sort of feelings have been felt by Irish Americans going back before the United States became the United States, going back in history from the time that the Irish first started to come here, first in small numbers and then in large numbers. And even today, 10 days from now, you see the St. Patrick's Day parade, you'll see a number of banners that'll say, England, get out of Ireland. It's one of the only banner that's allowed other than the organization banner in the St. Patrick's Day parade. And that's been true, that feeling, that theme has been there historically in the St. Patrick's Day parade for well over a century. It's been one of the most important themes of the parade as well as other aspects of Irish America. All right, what is this about? What is this feeling about? Why do people like me get involved at all? Why are you here as members of the Gaelic Society? Why do people worry about what's happening in Ireland? Why we should help? What our ties in? Particularly even if you're from a family like my own, been in the United States for generations on my mother's side, been in the United States since my grandfather's time, on my father's time, didn't have many direct connections, and what they were for someplace in the south of Ireland. But still, when things happen in Ireland, feel strongly about doing something about it, about reaching out, how we constantly will get appeals from Ireland because they count on Irish America. They look to us first, they always have, they always will, and why there is so often a response such as the one in 1981, the biggest response. When people, from March 1st, the day Bobby Sands began hunger strike, until October 3rd, the day it ended, literally, thousands of people would be in front of the British consulate in New York after work every day, Saturday and Sunday from 3 to 5, after work 5 to 7 on weekdays. We go every single day. In Philadelphia, in Boston, in cities across the United States, it was the same. In places where they didn't have a British consulate, people just take some location, they'll make that the honorary British consulate and march in front of it because they want to support Bobby Sands and Francis Hughes, Ray McCreesh, and the other hunger strikers because of what was going on, and they do it for 2 hours a day, every day. That's how important it was. That's how much it felt. And I remember people from Fordham who never had feelings about, they would tell me, gee, I never really felt Irish American. Then when this happened, I saw what was happening with Bobby Sands. I saw what was happening to the hunger strikers and the blanket men. I wanted to do something. I wanted to stand behind it. I'm proud that somebody from Fordham is involved. I'll be here. I'll be with you. And some of the people are still involved in Irish activities from that time as a result. Okay. How far does this go back? Why is it there? And I think the best explanation about why Irish Americans feel so strongly or feel this way about people in Ireland, particularly those involving oppression by the British, is because very often, the Irish who came to the United States regarded themselves not so much as immigrants or emigrants, but as exiles. They felt that they were here, that they were forced to come by a number of different things. There would be people who were involved in struggles. The actor John Wayne, he was tracing his roots, and he found out he was run out by the British. He was involved in one of the rebellions against the Crown. It goes back centuries with people who were come out to the United States. Some of the earliest examples, this is a business school. if any of you ever get a good job on Wall Street and you walk down to Trinity Church, you'll see it's an obelisk or a marker in Trinity Church, the graveyard, because they're buried in Ireland. But there is a marker to Thomas Addis Emmet and a marker to William McNevett. And they were two people. They were involved in the Irish rebellions and the United Irish Movement in the 1790s, 1798. And they actually were forced out. They were in prison. They were exiled. They went to France to try and get assistance from France, which was the most powerful country at that time, Ireland's ally. And after one rebellion in 1798 was crushed, and then another one by Robert Emmet, Thomas Addis Emmet brother, in 1803, they came to the United States. They settled, and Thomas Addis Emmet actually became the Attorney General of the state of New York. He became one of the most prominent lawyers in the country. And what he did, the Irish always have a sense of humor about resistance to British rule. They formed Emmet commemoration committees, or Emmet monument committees. And what these were, Robert Emmet, he was an Irish patriot. When he was captured, he was executed, hung, drawn, and quartered. You know, like if you ever see the movie Braveheart, hung, drawn, and quartered. That's what happened to Robert Emmet. And when he was being tried, such as it was, he made a speech. And the judge kept interrupting Lord Norbury and just, he finish yet type of thing, wouldn't let him speak. But he said one thing at the end of it. He said, "Let no man write my epitaph, because no one dares defend and vindicate my motives of what I stand for. When my country takes her place among the nations of the world, then and only then let my epitaph be written." So the Irish, and this is before there were big immigration, they would form the Emmet Commemoration or Emmet Monument Committee. Everybody knew what it meant. We were raising money because Robert Emmet's epitaph only gets put up when Ireland's a free nation. That's what they were thinking about. And again, even from that time, feeling was, if it wasn't for English laws, if it wasn't for the way the English restricted, damaged, undercut, would not allow Irish trade that in any way would interfere with what the British were trying to do. If they orchestrated laws that didn't help the landlord class, those who were loyal to England, but helped the people that actually owned the land, were entitled to the land, had been there for centuries. If they didn't use methods like outlawing it sometimes the Irish language, and you still can't get an Irish Language Act in the north of Ireland. They're still fighting for it, just for the right to have an Irish Language Act, like they have a Scottish Language Act or a Welsh Irish Act, but you can't have an Irish Language Act in the 6 counties in the north. Can't have bilingual signs. Can't have anything like that because there are people there under British rule who feel that that's too dangerous. That is a badge of nationality. And in fact, language and culture always did play a part of nationality. You look at the 1916 proclamation. They said that the Irish people are entitled, their right to Ireland's sovereignty was sovereign and indefeasible, and it could never be extinguished except by the destruction of the Irish people. And what they would go on and say is that the Irish language, Irish culture, Irish traditions, all those things that made them Irish rather than English, that was what gave them their right to their country of Ireland and would give them the right to independence. And that was always the mark in the United States. Okay, you have a few things I just want to point to, just a little bit of the history. Told you about Thomas Addis Emmet. But at the same time, Matilda Tone, the wife of Wolfe Tone, he was another Irish prisoner, founder of the Society of United Irishmen, father of Irish republicanism. She came to the United States and published the autobiography of Theodore Wolfe Tone. Couldn't be published in Ireland, couldn't be published anywhere else, had to come to America, do it. That is viewed as the handbook, the founding of Irish republicanism had the words, subvert the tyranny of our execrable government, to break the connection with England, this never-failing source of all our political evils, and to unite and to assert the independence of my country. These were my objects. To unite the whole people of Ireland, to abolish the memory of all past dissensions, to unite Catholic, Protestant, and dissenter as one. These were my means. That was his way, their way of doing it. Those were just 2 examples right away from the 1790s about Irish Americans, people coming here as exile and then looking forward, trying to work, trying to do things here, so that the struggle in Ireland, which seemed extinguished, seemed buried, seemed dead, defeated by the British, they would make it, keep it growing alive. They would start it, they would help, they would stand. Okay, then later on, just within a few years, you start to get the big Irish immigration. And I'll just mention two things that happened before that. In 1837, the organization that I'm with now is founded. And it was founded by somebody named Hughes from Tyrone, who was an archbishop. And what happened was at that time, you had the Know Nothings movement. In addition, when people left Ireland, those who emigrated here faced terrible discrimination. There were no equal rights laws. You couldn't go to the Supreme Court. You didn't have anything in Congress to help you. You didn't have civil rights marches. You actually had in Britain, they would have cartoons making fun of the Irish. They weren't fit to govern themselves. That's why the British had a governance. They would have pictures. Harper's Weekly, it was supposed to be a liberal magazine, had pictures. If you get it looks like a monkey or an ape or something like that, and you have the English person who looks normal because they were the ones who should rule us because the Irish couldn't rule themselves. Had cartoons about St. Patrick's Day, everybody's hitting each other with clubs and drinking with the other, stuff like that. That was the Ireland that people started to come to at that time. Archbishop Hughes, one of the things that happened was that Catholic churches were attacked in Philadelphia. They started to attack them in Kentucky and other areas. Archbishop Hughes called together a number of Irish immigrants who'd been involved in struggling back in Ireland and had come out before immigrating, and founded the Ancient Order of Hibernians. And their job was to protect the church. They did old St. Patrick's Cathedral. And they also had one of their early aims, the independence of Ireland. I get to that in a second. And I just mentioned Archbishop Hughes. He did two other things. 4 years later, he bought a lot of land that was considered way out of the way. And they said, but it's on the railroad line. And he founded a school, St. John's College. Okay? And you might have heard of it. It's now Fordham University. I think Hughes Hall is that name for the day. And he did one other thing. I just mentioned it doesn't have anything to do with Irish independence. He bought this land and started a cathedral way, way uptown. New York City grew from the bottom down by Wall Street, that area and up. He bought this property way, way uptown. And they called it Hughes's Folly. And they made a joke out of him. He said he's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing. And it was embarrassing. And if you're on Fifth Avenue and you pass St. Patrick's Cathedral, you'll see Hughes's Folly. So you see who was wrong and who was right. So it's not that. I think he earned having this hall named after him. There's something to do with things like that. But anyway, he was also he was somewhat sympathetic to Irish independence. It was a young Islander who would die, and he would go stand over at the funeral and say that the smartest people in Ireland, the greatest clergymen, realized that there are circumstances under which people should be allowed to rebel against their authority in meeting Britain. Okay. Those things happen. You start to get big, big immigrations. And these are immigrations people really thought of themselves. It's called the Great Hunger, and that's done for a reason. In previous times, when the potato crop, which was a big crop in Ireland, had fallen, they would just close the ports. And you had grain, and you had cattle, and you had meat, you had farm animals, you had all those things. And that would be enough to feed the country, and you just suspend rent for a year or 2 years, whatever it is. In the mid-1840s, the English now had a theory of laissez-faire. They felt that it's the hand of God. So if there is a hunger or a famine or something like that, we're not going to interfere. And this is really God's punishment for the Irish, and it's our way to get rid of it. And a country that at that time it's estimated to have 8 million people was reduced to under 4 million. They say at least 1 million died. They say 2 million came to the United States. Others would go to Canada and go to other countries. They would go on what were called coffin ships because many would die. They come here with nothing. They were pulled out from their homes. Children would go and they would know they would never see their family or their country or their neighbors again. And the feeling was, we're not immigrants. We're not there seeking young people here today might say, oh, I'll go to America, I'll go to another country and search a better job, a better life. That they're exiles. They were there because British rule in Ireland meant that the country couldn't control its own resources. It couldn't use them for the betterment of the Irish people as a whole. It couldn't serve Irish interests and Irish people, and they would be there if you had an Irish government ruling in the interests of the Irish people. And it was a fierce strive from that point for Irish independence. So much so, a couple of times during that period, you had the big St. Patrick's Day parade started. And you had that prejudice that Archbishop used, the know-nothings, those who thought the Catholics, all we're about is making Rome be the government of the United States, right? That's what they thought. And it's funny now, one of my earliest political memories, when I was a boy, going home, seeing my father really upset at the table, my mother, my grandfather. And what happened, they found out John F. Kennedy, people thought he wasn't fit to be president because he was a Catholic, and this is 1960. My father was an Iwo Jima veteran. He said, we're the best Americans, and we're going to fight for everybody. What can we do? Whatever. But that's how long that attitude continued, and that's, imagine what the prejudice was like in the 1840s. So people marched, and in the St. Patrick's Day parades, at that time you would see no Irish need apply for jobs. And what would happen is Democratic Party machine would count the number of marches, they'd count the number of potential Irish voters, and they'd start to open up things like a police department, like a fire department, like utilities, like now you have Con Ed or a phone company, things like that. You see so many Irish in those jobs working for the city, finally become lawyers, then ultimately judges. So that's where that tradition started, opening up those jobs, those types of things in the parade. But also, there would always be banners. One of the most prevalent said Erin go Bragh. And that was an American thing, started in the United States during the Mexican War. And what it meant, simply at that time, was Ireland forever. And what it meant simply, you might have British rule, you might have the British in Ireland, but Ireland was going to be there forever. It was going to be there before the British ever came to Ireland and took it over and started to do these things to us. And someday, the Ireland would be Ireland, and the Irish would have it after the British left for the last time. That's what it meant. And up until, I'd say, when I was a boy, actually, you'd still have, those would be the big flags, and then the tricolour started to replace them. But it'd always be England out of Ireland banners would be there as well. So that happened, and it's amazing. Some of the people who came over, they would be very patriotic about America. They'd be very patriotic about Ireland. What happened, what changed the attitude towards the Irish was the performance of the Irish Brigade of Irish soldiers during the Civil War. They became all of a sudden the fighting Irish. They were respected. They were honored. And some of the attitudes, I just quote one person, Michael Corcoran, and he founded one of the early Irish brigades, Corcoran's Legion. He was actually involved just before the Civil War started, and they had the Prince of Wales, who was going to be the future King of England, was brought out to review the troops, and he refused. They were going to court-martial him, but they had to bring him back into the army. And the way he described things, one half of my heart is Erin's, and the other half is America's. God bless America, and ever preserve her, the asylum of all the oppressed of the earth, is the sincere prayer of my heart. And that was the attitude of many of them. They're actually, in the Irish Brigades, many of the individuals, a large number, became Fenians. They would train to actually and hope that after the war, they would fight for America, maintain American independence. But some of them planned, and as soon as the war was over, the Civil War, that they would free Ireland. And a number of them went back to Ireland, brought weapons. If you're ever up in Woodlawn Cemetery, right behind where I live, there's a Colonel Thomas Kelly, who was a hero of the American Civil War. He became the leader of the Fenians. And when he and Timothy Deasy, another Fenian officer, an American Civil War hero, were captured, the Irish in Manchester broke them out, freed them. They made their way to the United States. 3 of the people who freed them were captured and killed. There was actually an American-born person, Edgar Omar Condon, and he was put on trial. He was not killed. He was supposed to be executed, and he shouted, "God save Ireland," in the courtroom when the English would start out, "God save the Queen," or "God save England" at the beginning. So you have those feelings. I just bring that up. Fenians actually invaded Canada, fought the Battle of Ridgeway there They sent weapons back, but it was part of the feeling about doing something for Ireland, how we're here as exiles. We want to free our ancestral home if we're here, or native home if we're born here. That's how strongly that feeling was. And it would continue on. You'd have movements. One of the Fenian leaders who was captured, he was recruiting troops into the British Army. A man named John Devoy became one of the most important people in Irish history. Sent out to New York, worked out, became a leader in Clan na Gael, founded the Gaelic American newspaper. And there were others who would come out to the United States. It's just moving really quickly because I don't want to go on 3 hours. One of them was a man named Tom Clark. And he actually came out, went back on it to, on an IRA or Republican mission, was captured, sentenced to life imprisonment. They would, under conditions that were not allowed to speak. A number of prisoners went mad, a number of them were killed. Wrote a book, Recollections of an Irish Prison Felon's Life, that inspired Bobby Sands and others. He then came back to the United States, was finally exiled here. And he bought a farm in Long Island, beautiful place, got 30 acres, and he got another 30 acres, he had 60 acres, it was great, doing really well. And then one day John Devoy brought him in and said, I need somebody to go back to Dublin and organize the Republicans there. And all the money, everything from America is going to go through you. And that was Tom Clark. His name is on the top of the proclamation. That's how it started. He would send people like Pierce and other leaders back to the United States to meet with John Devoy. Everything, material, all the moral encouragement, political encouragement that would go through the United States Congress would come through New York. That's why they refer to the exiled children in America in the proclamation. That's why America was regarded as so important. And even after the Rising, you would have, at the time of the Civil War, at the time of the War of Independence, at the time just after Treaty of Versailles, the First World War was over, you would have major input, Friends of Irish Freedom established. One of the reasons why the United States did not sign the original treaty to be involved in a League of Nations was because they were afraid that America would have to back up British troops putting down Irish rebellions. That's how much of an political impact they have. Okay, you have those things that happen, and individuals like Michael Flannery would found Irish Northern Aid, and others would lose the Civil War in Ireland. They were against the treaty, thought it wouldn't bring full Irish independence, wouldn't bring an Irish republic. They came to the United States and would form organizations here from time to time. All right, I'm just going to jump way ahead. The late 60s, you then have civil rights movement. And it's based basically on what they saw on TV. People like in Derry, for example, would sing We Shall Overcome. In Derry, in the North, 2/3 of the people were nationalists. They never had more than 1/3 of the elected representatives. You couldn't vote unless you had a householder. They were based on that. So Irish couldn't really break through no matter how many numbers they have. They were denied decent public housing, and unemployment for them was 2.5 times what it was for Protestants, because the idea was if you can't get a job, if you can't get a house, if you can't vote, if you can't change things, make it right, even if you're the vast majority of people, maybe you'll immigrate and we'll get rid of you. That was the hope. That would have happened. Civil rights movement was due to attack that, and ultimately the British attacked civil rights marches, and ultimately just almost exactly 50 years ago, Bloody Sunday, January 28, 1972, recently commemorated the 50th anniversary. 14 civil rights marchers were just shot down. British afterwards said they all had guns, they were all shooting at us. They made up, it would take them 30 years before they'd admit the truth or apologize or say that the people who were killed were guilty of nothing except marching for civil rights in part of Britain, part of Ireland, demanding their own rights as Irish people in a part that was still ruled with Britain. Okay, so this happens, and there's a couple of things around that time. In the early 1970s, you had some struggle start, but most people felt civil rights would do it. If we can knock out discrimination, if we get the vote, if we get decent housing, we can gradually use that for peaceful change in our own country, peaceful change in the north of Ireland. And as soon as there was any kind of resistance, the British used this as an excuse. there were three key events I'll point to. Number one, internment without charge or trial. They started just arresting people. Your name, they put your name down if they suspected you, and you get jailed. And if they decided to release you, you could get released. There was no charge, trial, or bail. Nothing you could do. On the same day as internment started in Ballymurphy, a number of people, including a Catholic priest, a grandmother, 8 others were massacred, Ballymurphy massacre. One priest was he went out to help somebody who was wounded, waved a handkerchief. A grandmother went out to help him when she saw him being shot, killed. And then the British said they were all shooting at them and their troops were under fire, although there was not one bullet, one gun, nothing. And those three things changed and then Bloody Sunday. Changed everything. I can't tell you how many people I know who would tell me, I believe in civil rights. I thought civil rights would do it. But if you can be arrested without charge and held indefinitely, if they can shoot you down and lie about it and say you were wrong, if they can shoot you down for marching to civil rights, then how are we going to ever get civil rights or justice from this group? Okay, so things change from civil rights to struggle by people, Irish Republican Army, and their feeling was, if we could make Britain, England, too costly to remain there, if they declare their intention to leave, we can have real negotiations with all of the people of Ireland, guarantee the rights of all of the people of Ireland, regardless of whether you're the North or the 26 counties or Protestant, whatever, and you can have a new Ireland, a new country, the thing we always wanted. So that would shift it, and as part of internment, the British declared there was a hunger strike in the early 70s, and as part of that, they said that they had to recognize hunger strike was for political prisoner status, but the British said, we're not going to do that, but we will give you special category status. And what that meant is you were like a World War II prison camp movie. You wore your own clothes, you walk around together, you could march and drill in Lancash, you could go with your other Republicans, they would march you together. If there was a problem, your commanding officer would talk to the British authorities. That was it. Everything they wanted, except they said special category status instead of political prisoner status. Okay. In 1976, it got too embarrassing for the British to do that. And the reason was there were congressmen out here like Biaggi and others, the ad hoc committee, particularly in the United States, which gave moral support to Republican prisoners, particularly about internment and others. And they decided, they used to say, the British would say, we have no political prisoners, and this is just criminals, and that's all that's wrong. We have too many criminals. We have to charge them and arrest them. And Americans would say, to embarrass them, well, if you have so many criminals, why do you have so many special category prisoners? Why do you have to recognize them like that? Why are they different? What's different about Ireland? Isn't this really a conflict, a struggle, a legitimate struggle for freedom? It makes it totally different from anything else. And these people would see that as part of Ireland's historic. There have been generations that fought against the British, the generation in 1916, generations before conquest, the generations of the Fenians, all of that. They saw themselves as a continuation of that struggle. So in 1976, the British came up with a great strategy. They said, it's embarrassing for us. We'll make all these people criminals. We'll give them a trial, a diplomat trial, no jury trial. Here you have to have a jury trial, so you have to prove guilt to fair and impartial members of the community. And sometimes fair and impartial members of the community will decide that people are innocent, particularly there's no proof. So they said, we'll give you a diplomat court, meaning some judge in a wig who's there because he's favorably disposed to British rule and thinks everybody's against it is wrong, is going to decide your fate. About 80% of the cases there were based on confessions that were beaten out of people. And prisoners, first Kieran Nugent, who was a teenager, Fra McCann, and others, they felt that if they put on this criminal uniform, they would be betraying their struggle. There was a song that came out a little bit later, I'll wear no convict uniform, nor meekly serve my time, that England might brand Ireland's fight 800 years of crime. And that's what they thought was happening. The British wanted to dress them up in criminal uniforms, to take pictures, to show them that they now accepted that they were criminals, that there were no political prisoners, no legitimate struggle in Ireland. And these men and women prisoners in Alma said, no, we're not going to accept this. We're not going to betray our struggle as we're prisoners. We're not going to help you dress up and and costume us and play at so that you can make us in and use us against our own struggle. That's what that issue was about. So this goes on. The British tried to make everybody accept those criminal uniforms. It began with a series of beatings. Cells that they put them in did not have toilets, and when people left to go to the toilet, they would be singled out and beaten. So prisoners stopped going and using the toilets. Cells would become filled with everything. They couldn't dump out anything. They would get these mirror searches, special searches, be bent over things and looked at just to try to humiliate them, embarrass them that way. As I said, they were routinely beaten. Most of the young prisoners, it was, they try to single out people, pick out people who were vulnerable, intimidate them, get them to accept criminal status. And so ultimately, it started to get to a point where everybody knew if things didn't change, there would be a hunger strike. And there were initiatives by Cardinal O'Fee, there were other things that happened. And at that time, a plea was made from inside Lancash to America. And it came to Irish Northern Aid. They said, you got to change. We need a lot of publicity about what's happening in Lancash. We need America to get involved. We need you to have a new publicity department, a political action department to work on this issue. We think that American pressure can make the difference so that we'll never go to a hunger strike. And that's how I'd been going to Ireland, my own impression, why I feel the way I do. I actually owe it to being in Fordham. The college year, it ended in the beginning of May. When does it end now? When did you last have a term?
May, right? Yeah, May.
Right. And city jobs then. I had a city job. I used to work in the Parks Department for the summer. They didn't start till June because of budget. So I figured I got 30 days, right? I always wanted to go to Ireland. The fares were real cheap. I'll just go once. I'll see what it's like. I can actually see it, reunite. I never met any of my relatives. They'd all died, the ones from Ireland died. So I went, and my family's from Offaly. I went there. I worked on the bar, did all that stuff. I thought it was great. People thought I was crazy, whatever. But I also just made contact with some people. They said, look, if I'd like to go to the north and see what's happening, what is it like? And they got me a place to stay. And I went up for about a week. You just go up on the train. And what I saw really made me feel different. Here, guys, a lot like me, same names, different accents. You all like to go drinking. You all like to, try and chat up girls and everything. I was like a little bit different because I was from America. They assumed I was rich, so I would help them. That's it. Everything was the same. I had a really good time. Except, I grew up in New York. First of all, when it was dole day, you'd see everyone in a whole neighborhood going down and collecting welfare. Because all of these people, the vast majority, couldn't get a job. Their parents had never had jobs. Just because they were born they were raised as Catholics, and it was assumed they would be disloyal to the state, and they had to face sectarian discrimination, and none of the jobs would be located in their area. It's just a shock to me. I grew up with the fact that if you wanted to work hard, I'd see guys, they would go to a Sinn Féin office, they'd work all day, they were brilliant. They couldn't get a job or couldn't work, right? Because of the system. Me, I became first job, assistant DA, uncle was a cop, father a fireman, cops were always my friend, they would always sort of look after you. If you're Irish, you sort of okay, except in Yonkers, I don't know why, that was. But anyway, you go there, and all of a sudden, we're getting stopped, we're getting thrown against the wall. It'd be easier once I found out I was American, you get spread eagle, you get searched. What are you doing? The men and where you going? They'd see you back and forth, and they'd ask you 2 or 3 times. You get hassled, you get pressured, the word was out. You have a gun pointed at you occasionally, walking around just to stop, checkpoint, everything. And it just showed how different things were. It just made me want to go back. I said, what is it like if you never have an opportunity, a real opportunity to get a job in your own place where you grew up? What is it like if you never have an opportunity to vote and get political power or do anything? You can't even go and complain and throw the bugs out. What is it like if instead of at least leaving you alone or being friendly or being somebody you could call if there's a problem, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, the police force of the day, views you as an enemy and treats you as an enemy? just when you leave your house, when you walk down the street, when you go on. And it just made me want to go back. I had a couple of other experiences. I remember getting a lift from a family. They used to have these little holy water founts. I don't know if they still have those. I haven't seen one in a long time. I remember being stopped by a patrol just going over the border. And there's machine gun nuts on the top, and everybody, and they get this little holy water fountain, they're throwing it up in the air, and the person who gave me a lift, he's there with his wife. He had a young child, about 4 or 5 years old, in the back, and they held us for about a half hour. The husband and I liked this on the road for a while, and just throwing this around, big joke. And finally, they let us go. We get down the road, and all of a sudden, the girl starts crying hysterically in the back, and she has to go out. She gets ill on the side of the road. And you see the father, you see the mother looking at that, and that's just there because they were Irish, and they could be because they had this holy water fountain where they lived or whatever, they'd be viewed as the enemy, and that's the way they were going to be treated under British rule. And it just, I went back a number of times, and finally I decided, I finished law school and get a job, I'm going to do something. And people there respected the Irish Northern Aid Committee, and they used to get slammed in the papers, in the New York Times, and the British. So I said, I'll join that. Okay. So anyway, I joined, and I'm there. Most of the people at that time were from Ireland. It would change very dramatically during the hunger strike. But in the late 70s, they decided that they are going to need a reorganization in America. And hopefully there won't be a hunger strike, but we have to change. And I just happened to be there. They didn't have that many people who were interested in publicity, and I was sort of supposed to be in the background because I was an assistant DA. And I knew my boss, Mario Morello, even though he lived in Woodlawn, wouldn't be too happy if he found it. And I got involved, became the publicity director, and then finally one day, Kieran Nugent, the first blanket man, they started to send people out here when things were getting really bad, just to speak. They were denied visas, and they weren't allowed to speak because the British protested and objected. And Kieran Nugent, I was there once he got picked up, just before he could say a word. And TV cameras were there. They were going to take him away. He couldn't speak up. And one of the people there was with me, said, you're going to let him go away without saying a word for him. And I had to go out, say something, and they say, this is un-American. This man just wants to speak. The British are torturing people. This is the same thing that happened to American prisoners in the Revolution. Why is it that America, we believe in free speech, don't want to hear it, can't be allowed to hear the truth of what's happening in Lankesh and the political prisoners there? And I got called in, but they didn't fire me because I figured they had too many Irish Americans in Woodlawn around. They're all working. But that's how I became publicity director. That's how I got involved. And as this thing escalated, it moved forward. It became obvious. It was a hunger strike in 1980. And then in 1981, we were able to focus enough attention. It became clear enough that, again, involvement of Irish America, the thing in Irish America that pulls us every day, March 1st through October 3rd, the end of the hunger strike, there was large numbers of people, over 1,000 people in New York. When Bobby Sands died, Sean Sands' brother, 10,000 people marched from the British consulate to Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza carrying a coffin. Policemen saluted or stopped or stood at attention. A month later, the British sent out Prince Charles. These demonstrations were very large. 1,000 was a small turnout. Prince Charles came out. He was going to reassure everybody that was his first visit to America, that the English were so civilized they could never do anything wrong. I pulled in Sean Sands. Maura MacDonald's brother was on hunger strike. Joe McDonald, if you've heard that song. Elizabeth O'Hara. And these people were all great because it was almost, you could see like the hunger strike as a resemblance and all. It was almost like hearing them each other. And about 20,000 people marched at Lincoln Center. The next day, the Prince complained about New York and Irish America and the reception to the mayor. Mayor Cox was very outspoken, and he just said, well, you should get out of Ireland if you don't like it. I mean, that was his attitude. British papers didn't like it. But that was the context. That was the feeling. And for all of those days, every day, people, press, TV would come to the Irish Northern Aid office. We'd get statements on telexes. We would read that out. We'd give an update. And every evening, they'd be read at demonstrations, and crowds were there. People, sometimes they'd cry, very emotional. politicians would ask us if they could come and speak because the crowds were so large, the TV coverage was so guaranteed. And as a result of what they did, it not only showed that these people were not criminals. Criminals don't die such deaths for the freedom for their country. They don't have that kind of respect and support. But a couple of things were happening on the outside. The visa denial issue that we were pushing. We'd say, why can't people like Kira Nugent and others come to the United States, or Jerry Adams to speak? Would finally come to the fore a few years later, after when President Clinton was running for president. He had to address the issue of visa denial. Politician John Deere, New York Assemblyman, came up with the idea of starting to talk about a special envoy, and that became George Mitchell, the man who would put together the peace settlement. An Irish-American agenda emerged. We started to do candidates forums, and it got so strong, as I said, that in 1992, all the Democratic candidates came and addressed them and said they would support visas, they would support a special envoy, they would support McBride principles against religious discrimination. All of those things happened. That's how strong. And today, Sean Sands, when he came and spoke at Fordham, he said there were 300 people. I didn't know. I heard it was a lot bigger. They filled Keating Hall. People stayed for 3 hours and they cheered. They were very emotional about it because of what he meant, what the hunger strike represented, what that issue was. But even today, right now, if you march on St. Patrick's Day, you'll see signs down Fifth Avenue. England, get out of Ireland, because of that same pull of people who believe that only when British rule is ended, only when Ireland is governed as a whole in the interest of all the Irish people, will be real justice, real peace, and want to see it. You'll see people today. There is a measure in Congress right now by Congressman Keating from Massachusetts. You can't get any congressman to agree on anything, but so far, 45 members of congressmen from way on the left, people on the Republican right, they've signed a resolution against the proposal. The British want to do away with any investigation, any kind of criminal proceeding, any kind of inquest. If the British killed people during the Troubles and we never investigated, we lied about it. We've had a couple of inquests like Ballymurphy and Bloody Sunday and others, and the British always lose, and the people who claim that they were murdered win. They want to stop it. One of them is a friend of mine, Liam Ryan, who lived in the Bronx for a number of years, went back home, bought a bar, was killed in that bar in front of his wife and young child, and applying for an inquest now. I'm leading a tour in April, and bringing 50 people over from around the United States just to meet with victims, to meet with leading politicians, to go over those issues, to put as much pressure as we can on the British. Now, again, I was given an exclusion order by the British government, by Margaret Thatcher. They killed somebody, attacked a rally, attacked many people just because I was there. They had to drop that because it was illegal. The British are worried about the United States. They've always been worried about the United States. And there's always something in the United States, Irish America, that makes us give them something to worry about. We were there in the beginning before any part of Ireland was free. We helped to make it so. We'll be there at the end when the rest of Ireland is free, and we'll help to make it so. And I'm proud of the fact that people from Fordham would have gone down to those demonstrations and be a part of it and listen to Sean Sands and applaud him. I'm proud of the fact that what Irish America has accomplished and what Irish America will accomplish in supporting freedom for the people of Ireland till the day that they get it. Okay? Any questions before I go, or does that cover everything more than you want to do?
That was a really great overview of Irish America's history involvement, I'd say. My humble opinion. I really enjoyed it. Does anyone have any questions? Anybody? I know I have one. In the context of Brexit, a lot of people are talking about unification again.
Sorry?
In the context of Brexit, a lot of people are talking about unification happening via an election because people in Northern Ireland would rather stay in the EU. The question I have is we know that in 2014, Scotland narrowly lost their vote for independence from the United Kingdom, and the SNP has a majority now in the Scottish Parliament, but Westminster is blocking it, and their argument is you had a vote 6 years ago. Obviously, the Good Friday Agreement provides Northern Ireland a different, they don't have to go through Westminster to vote. but is that not an effective argument? And if that is an effective argument, do you see there being like a delay in an election?
The problem you have that we face, the way the agreement was written, is that a British secretary has to say he thinks there'll be enough support, for a united Ireland. British governments don't tell the truth. I mean, they still will not tell the truth. This is a guy who, his attitude when he sees people who were murdered in 1971 or 1972 get some kind of justice through a British court proceeding. So the answer's simple. Let's do away with all these court proceedings. Let's take away those rights. That's Brandon Lewis. Scotland, what they did, there seemed to be a majority in favor of Scottish independence, and right beforehand they said, oh, you're not going to get your pensions if you live there, or the pound will float, and they scared some of the older people, and they lost. And right now, you have the leading figure in Scotland is saying that she wants another referendum. She believes that it'll pass. Particularly, they didn't like Brexit. They wanted to remain part of the European community. They didn't like Britain is going to suffer a lot. It's a foolish decision. They thought they would be the British Empire once again if they changed. And instead, they just found they lost a lot of markets. They are having trouble in the north of Ireland. Just because unionists were told there wouldn't be any kind of difference between you or the 6 counties and trade in England. And of course, there had to be because under the European community, once you ship products into a European country, which Ireland is one, they can go all through. Everybody goes all through. You don't have any customs duty. You don't have any checks. So if England shipped its products into the north and there was no checks going into the south, they could get them anywhere. They could ship them to Poland, ship them to any country, which there's no point in having a common market if you do that. Okay? So England passed this. They think it was a real right-wing plot. They think they're the British Empire. They got through. It's not working for them. They are now in a weaker position because the European community, they realize the strength of it. They back Ireland on the protocol. England made an agreement, or Britain, it's really Westminster made an agreement in English interest to Scottish and Welsh will tell you that as well. They made an agreement that suited English interests. They don't want to keep it. They're in trouble, and they can't override all of the European countries that they signed the agreement with. So that is certainly an argument. One of the many arguments for Irish independence. The attitude of unionists is to just say, we won't cooperate and we won't discuss it, and because anyone wants to see is an Ireland that guarantees them equal rights, equal opportunities, and can you have areas. Derry, for example, and Donegal were like really tied into each other. Tyrone and Monaghan, you just have whole areas, hospitalization, economic strategy, everything would be much better off as one country. And the British, by dividing the country, they stopped there from being a lot of competition. They still see themselves as the British Empire. They will do everything they can to stop there from being a referendum. And obviously, American pressure is one of the things that the people in Ireland are looking for, to get the referendum and then hopefully to win it with the growing numbers of a nationalist movement towards a nationalist majority. If we don't have it already, we will soon. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So
Yes.
you think America is crucial in getting Irish independence or Irish unification?
I think, look, there's two things that happen. The British will always say, we have the special relationship favor us. And there'll be some places, some people, some individuals that will do that. In terms of the activists who are on the ground, I mean, you look at the resolution that was now had. Congressman Bowman just signed on to it. Monderi Jones from Westchester just signed on. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We can appeal. Plus, we have Elise Stefanik, people like that on the Republican right. And the reason is because people who care about Ireland will go in and say, I vote here. I'm your constituent. I care about this issue. I want you to support this issue to oppose a British amnesty proposals. And can get signatures, can get support, can work it. And we don't have a big budget. We don't have lobbyists. But we go in and say, we're voters, and it's important to us if you want our vote to vote on this issue. And that's what worked with Clinton to open visas. That's what worked whenever we have candidates forums that John Deere arranged. And when candidates get asked about Irish issues, and if they say the right thing, they get applauded. They don't, they say something supportive of the British, they don't. So that's what we have. We have people who are active, who go there, who call their congressmen, who want something, and we've gotten a lot of support. I think there were 36 members of Congressmen signed a letter to Boris Johnson when he came to Washington about this. There were a number of others that have contacted the Biden administration. We have people in the Republican administration who also are trying, like Elise Stefanik is a deputy leader. She's pushing it, other Republican congressmen. So what we have, what we've always had, are the people on the ground who care a lot about Ireland, who push for it, who work for it, try and get their representatives to sign on for it. Do that very simple thing, speak for Irish justice. Anything else? Why did we stay so long? I don't know. Okay, thank you very much.